Okay. Right then. First of all, we're going to start this session. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start this session with just mopping up a couple of things from the last session, which we left hanging in the air or were asked, and I was asked to respond to, and I didn't have time for. So we'll start doing that now. Firstly, I did some work summarizing, going through and summarizing your comments on the Padlet. There was a lot to read there. It took me a while to get through it. But what I did was I noted down the points and summarized them, and I'd like to just present a summary of the main points that came up at the beginning of this session. So that's one thing. Secondly, there was some discussion about how we give feedback on short writing tasks. There was a question about copying off the board, which led to some lively discussion on the chat box, which we didn't have time to relate to. And then I'm going to go on to the main topic of this session, which is feedback and assessment, giving feedback on written compositions, a major issue, which is finding time to do it in a busy schedule when you have a lot of classes and a lot of students. Use of digital correction, digital tools, and then talking about assessment criteria, the use of rubrics and checklists. And finally, I hope I have time to get round to talk a little bit about portfolios. Okay, so start off with Padlet responses. General consensus on a number of points, which I'd like to just summarize here. Most people agreed that textbooks writing tasks on the whole do provide good scaffolding. Sometimes, not always, but when they do, it's very good that they provide model text for students to base their own texts on. But a lot of people said that they are not motivating. They are very, very Bagrut oriented, particularly obviously in high school, but even in junior high. Some specific points which you brought up. You said that there was a need for, and a lot of the textbooks don't provide this, some kind of purpose for writing. There's too much writing for the sake of writing, rather than giving students some kind of authentic or purposeful or interesting reason to write. Although the books do provide some scaffolding, a lot of you said that you need more. For example, providing first last sentence or providing phrases that the students should include. Some of you mentioned that there was very little choice. Students that were not allowed to choose topic or task in the writing assignments. You felt there should be more personal topics. They're all very impersonal and boring, maybe because these are the topics that come up in Bagrut. And the textbook does not give very many opportunities to rewrite and correct texts which they've written. I found a lot of really nice ideas for writing tasks, lots and lots. And I'm just going to give a few of them here because they're really nice. And there were more which I didn't have time, or rather I had time, didn't have space to include. And I want to get on to other topics and can't spend too much time on this in this session. So the writing tasks which gave with the people who gave them. Movie review, she said, worked well, Miriam said. And I added a movie review with a specific goal of recommending a particular movie or saying, don't see this because it's awful and why. Someone I would like to meet. In the literature, ask the main character in a story 5 questions. There's no harm, but it could be any number of questions. A new place I visited. My ideal present was my idea, but this grew out of a suggestion of Miriam's, which was a thank you note to someone who gave me a present. Response to a specific email, and an act of kindness, and I added here the opposite, something I regret, something which I did badly, which I would do differently with hindsight. Um, Beginning of a mystery story to complete, travel blog, your own restaurant. Leah suggested an ideal meal menu. I added the contrary, or an awful meal menu, a meal you would really not like to eat, just to give it a little twist. Um, Short writing tasks feedback. Someone wrote in the chat box last time, and I didn't have time to respond to this. If they know they won't get feedback, they won't write. Now, that begs the question, really, why write? I mean, are you writing because you want feedback or because you have something to say? And it basically, of course, it's a combination. If the students know they're going to get feedback, obviously it's going to raise their motivation to write. If they have something interesting to write, and a reason to write, and a goal, and an audience, and a fun challenge to write, they're going to write. And what we really want both, don't we? We want the promise of some kind of response from the teacher, maybe delayed, but at least at some point, a a response, and an interesting topic or task. A crucial issue here is, first of all, we do need to give feedback as much as we can. And I'll come on later to the problem of time, which is the main stumbling block here. But feedback is so important for students to know what they've done well, what they've done badly, and just to get a response from the teacher, just the awareness that teacher is looking at it and considering it and telling you how they respond. On the other hand, if everything the students write has to get feedback, if we're going to give feedback on every single thing, every word the student writes, then that's going to limit the amount they can write, because we can't, if they write too much, we're not going to have time, not going to be able to respond to it. So there's a sort of contradiction here, or an issue, or a paradox. Yes, we want to respond, but we may not be able to respond thoroughly. If we have to respond thoroughly to everything, then the students are not going to be able to write very much. And that's not going to be enough. They're not going to learn writing. So there's sort of paradox here. And the question is, what's the answer? And there's no, complete perfect answer, but I'll attempt to give some possible things that can help, if not solutions. Some types of feedback for short writing assignments. I think people have said this before in previous sessions, the idea of a very brief acknowledgement feedback rather than detailed response to every word. Some kind of feedback. Yes, I've read this and I appreciate the fact that you wrote it. So with ticks or checks or smileys or stars, asterisks, or I forget who it was suggested last time, a punch, which makes a star punch, and you can do in a moment, and shows that you've appreciated and seen what the student has written. Another possibility is random checks, taking in a selection of what they've written, not everything, but each time taking from other people, so that over time everybody gets their writing related to by the teacher. And I'll come back to this when I get to talking about portfolios. Another kind of feedback is, I suggested last time, the activity Pass It On, where they're getting response from their peers, which is another kind of feedback, and peer editing, which I'll come back to when we're talking about writing essays. But this is where students get together and give each other feedback and help each other get their texts as good as they can. In any case, it's very obvious that students do need to know in advance how, when, and by whom their writing will be read and responded to. And we move on to the next topic, which is copying off the board. Yes, Sarah says feedback is also a form of respect. Yes, it's a sign of respect. It gives the message, I appreciate your writing and I respect it. Yes, absolutely. Copying off the board. What do we ask students to copy off the board? Very often new vocabulary, right? But also we might ask them to copy samples of sentences for grammar, or cues for writing, for example, the first sentence of a story, or various other things. And a problem that someone brought up, I think, in the chat box last time was the problem that some students write more slowly and some faster. And how do you how do you get people to keep up? How do you cope with this? So I'm sure you have different solutions, which I hope you'll write in the chat box. But meanwhile, my solutions, or my possible solutions. First of all, new vocabulary, yes, yes, they do need to write it down. Just today I was looking through new research, and again and again I come across new studies which say, yes, it does make a difference if students write them down by hand. It makes a difference to how well they remember. So yes, ask them to write it down. You might ask them only to write down the words, expressions which you didn't know before. You don't have to write them down all of them. And one of you suggested that they write down with a synonym and a translation. Yes, I would even just write a translation to save time. Synonyms are sometimes tricky. Yes, peer response, Amy. I'll come on to that. As I said, when I'm talking about essays, that needs some more time and space to relate to. Yes, I agree with what you're saying. So, problem speed of copying, and how can we get over this? Well, some possibilities here. Just note the attendance form, guys. It'll be up for another 10 minutes, right? And you can sign in there. Meanwhile, back to me, my slide here. Possibilities.
People come late because there's a Tidruk for marking the Bagrut exams.
Yes. Well, I've already posted this on the Moodle. So people who are coming in late because of the Tidruk can catch up later. And we haven't got to the main topic of this this presentation yet anyway. Possibilities of speed of copying, the varying speed of copying. One possibility is if it's not important for you to write it all down, just say copy as much as you can in so many minutes, how many you allot, and everyone has to stop at a certain time, and as much as you've copied, you've copied. If it's important to you that they all copy everything that you've put on the board, then this is another possibility. If a student finishes early, tell them to help the person next to them to finish copying. Or a third possibility, have a reserve task for the faster people to do while waiting for everyone else. Okay, Shoshi says she's transcribing this call with your Tactic Air extension. Yeah, the possibilities are amazing. In any case, Gail, this is being recorded and transcribed, right? Yeah. So, yeah, right. A timer, Sarah suggests, yes. Timer which is displayed to them so they know how much time they have. Okay, and let's move on to the main topic of this session today, which is feedback and assessment. Yes, so I noticed what you say about synonyms. Michelle says, please remember to fill in the attendance form once. Once you've done it, you've done it. You don't need to do it again. Okay. Feedback and assessment. This is an area which I have to admit I am less an expert on than I am on some of the other topics to do with writing, and I will ask for your help later on with some of the material. I just want to clear out of the way, first of all, the terminology, and then I'll talk about the research. So we've got these four um, terms: feedback, correction, corrective feedback, assessment. I just want to sort them out a little bit and then say which ones I'm going to use. Feedback is anything you say in response to the student's writing that they can then use to understand something better, to do it better next time, to feel good, anything which gives them the feedback. So feedback is any response, not necessarily a grade. Correction is a response which focuses on mistakes and correcting mistakes. Corrective feedback is the same, but corrective feedback is the term which is mostly used today. If you're reading the research, that's the term they use, because the argument is I can give corrective feedback, I cannot correct. The only person who can correct is the student themselves. If I give corrective feedback, I say, this is not what it should be this, the student may or may not accept the correction, in which case correction has taken place. If they have not accepted it or not remembered it, then it's not correction, but I have given, from my point of view, the teacher, I have given corrective feedback. Finally, there is assessment, and assessment is a kind of feedback, but it is the assessment, the kind of feedback which consists solely of giving a grade, usually numerical, or maybe using a letter. Each school has its own norms about how assessment is done, so you normally just have to do what the school says, but there are various possibilities here. Okay, so in this session, I'm going to use two main terms: feedback, which includes corrective feedback, but not only. In other words, I might most of the feedback we give students is indeed on mistakes, and I'm sure most of you have found this, that when you're giving feedback, you're mostly focusing on this is wrong, you should do it that way, or correcting spelling or grammar and so on. But not only, because it also includes things like organization, coherence, and content. And I distinguished between feedback and assessment, where assessment is the giving of an evaluative grade of some kind. Let's look at the research literature. First of all, there's an enormous amount. I mean, I had quite a lot in my own database, and in preparing for this session, I found a lot more. It's just unending. It seems to interest people very much, and there's a lot of research all over the world on what's called WCF, written corrective feedback. You come across this abbreviation quite a lot. The most on corrective feedback. I just want to go back a bit in time. About 20, 30 years ago, there was a huge discussion over whether correction actually helps, whether it's useful or not. And the main focus was a guy named John Truscott. And I've given a bibliography, incidentally, at the end of this presentation, which includes the reference to Truscott's main article on written feedback, although he was also against spoken feedback. He claimed that correction in both oral and written work is useless. I came across today, when I was just finishing off preparing this, I came across an interview with John Truscott in about 3 or 4 years ago, when he still says, in spite of the fact that a lot of people argue with him, he still says, I still believe that corrective feedback is useless. It actually is fairly extreme for the various reasons, like teachers correct inconsistently and sometimes wrongly. Okay, we're human beings, it happens. Students are sometimes hurt by being corrected. Students may not take correction seriously. Learners do not learn from the correction. I want to take each of these and say what my opinion is, and invite you to comment also in the chat box. Judy, don't we differentiate between formative and summative assessment? Of course we do, but I haven't got onto assessment yet. When I get to it, I'll talk about that. Okay, first of all, we're talking about feedback, corrective feedback, corrective correction. Oh, sorry, start again. Corrective feedback on written work. And these are the examples, and I want to say what my answer to him would be, and a lot of people who responded to his article and argued against him, saying, yes, it is useful, also responded. So here's the first argument. Teachers correct inconsistently, sometimes wrongly. And what he's implying here is, I think, rather insulting. He's saying you don't do it well, so don't do it at all. And I would say that inconsistency is not a disaster, and we are human beings, and we are not going to be utterly, completely as consistent as a machine or as consistent as AI. And I would say that teachers, on the whole, do tend to correct correctly. That's our job. That's what we're there for. And to accuse us of making mistakes, it doesn't get anybody anywhere, and I don't think it's fair or true. Students are hurt by being corrected, he says. Well, we'll discuss this later. There is something in this, but there is considerable evidence, and I'll bring it to you later, that students feel that correction is part of the rules of the game. They expect to be corrected. And it's part of what you do when you teach them is correcting. And I would add that the ability to provide corrective feedback respectfully and supportively is part of professional competence. That's one of the things we learn how to do. Yes, Sulaf, yes, I'll come on to rewriting. You're absolutely right, of course. I'll come on to rewriting later. It's absolutely essential. Well, it's not essential, but it makes a big difference to how well the students remember your rewrites. Dina, corrective feedback of writing is useful only if we have more than one draft. Otherwise, it's a total waste of time. I think you're being a bit extreme here. I don't think it's a total waste of time. There are cases where students remember even if they haven't rewritten, but I would agree with both you and Sulaf that the rewriting is extremely important and makes a huge difference. Students may not understand or take corrections seriously. I think it's rather a silly criticism. It's like saying, well, anything about our teaching, we may not be understood or taken seriously. When we explain something, we may not be understood. When we tell them what to do for homework, we may not be understood. When we tell them what a word means, we may not understand or take correction seriously. I mean, really, does this mean that we should not therefore teach? I think this is rather a silly criticism, and it's up to us to make sure that students do understand and to do everything we can to make sure that they do take us seriously, whether we are correcting or doing anything else. David says, I only mark the errors, but they need to figure out what to do. Yes, we'll talk about that later. Yeah. Okay, I'm just glancing down. I can't answer everything. It's going too fast. Yes, Miriam says what works really well is to sit with pupils and talk to them. Absolutely. If you have time, that's great. That makes a difference. If you just correct and do nothing else, it's true, it's far less effective. Symbols, underlining, yes, I'll come on to that. So to move on to here, his final criticism, which I think is the only really crucial and important one, is a key issue. Learners do not learn from the correction. This is what you have you've been writing about in the last few entries in the chat box, and quite rightly. This is the crucial issue. Will they or will they not learn from my correction? Research evidence is controversial and sometimes contradictory. On the whole, it is they do learn, but not immediately and not completely. In other words, if a student, you correct something with a student and the next day they make the same mistake again, this does not mean that your correction was a waste of time or totally useless. It means that the learning has not yet taken place, but you've planted a seed. And after you've perhaps corrected the same thing 2 or 3 times, then it may catch on. It's not a case of okay, I'll just give them the correction and that's it. They'll get it right forever. And if they don't get it right forever, I've failed. It's not like that. Learning is not like that. It's gradual, it's partial, it's cumulative, and we have to know that if a student does not immediately take on board a correction that we've given them, this does not mean we've failed. It means that it takes time, and we need to be patient and remind them, or get them to remind each other. So, conclusions: the effect of corrective feedback is variable. It may only work partially and gradually, but if there's anything which is even less effective than correcting, it is not correcting. It's an investment. Correcting may pay you back a lot immediately, may pay you back over time, may not pay you back for a while, but it's an investment which we have to make. And if we don't make that investment, then we're doing our students a disservice. Okay. As I said, there's an enormous amount of research. So what I did when preparing this session was I went to a survey of a number of research articles from a couple of years ago in a very important research journal. If there's only one research journal you read, this is the one you should read. It's called Language Teaching, published by Cambridge. And they do surveys and updates, and they're really reliable and good. As I say, I've put all the references at the end of this presentation, which I've uploaded to the Moodle. So the survey of the research came up with the following finding. First of all, teachers, and we're talking about worldwide here, okay, not Israel. Teachers tend to correct everything. There has been, I'll come on to it in a moment, there has been some suggestion that we should correct only selectively, but on the whole, teachers do tend to correct everything that's wrong. And there is an entrenched belief, not only here, but all over the world, entrenched belief that it's important to get your grammar right, to get your vocabulary right. In other words, the emphasis with most teachers, if you interview teachers, most of them talk about correcting mistakes in language and relate less to organization or coherence or style, other things like that. A third finding is that students, if you ask them, want to be corrected. And if you ask them if they want the teachers to correct only some of the mistakes or all of the mistakes, most of them worldwide tend to say, we want you to correct everything. What happens when you have corrected everything is another story. But if you ask them, this is what they say they want. Both direct and indirect. I guess people were talking here in the chat box about underlining and letting the students work out for themselves what's wrong, or putting a cross in the margin, or putting a code like G for grammar or SP for spelling. That's indirect correction. Direct correction means actually crossing out a word and writing the correct one instead. So there's direct and indirect, and I'll come on to talk about that a little bit later. They both have pros and cons for either way. The indirect does indeed get students to think for themselves, but very often, if they're short of time, they won't even try to do it because we've said before the problem of students ignoring corrections, whereas if it's written in, they're more likely to notice and understand and take it on board. On the other hand, we don't have time. On the other hand, we want students to be autonomous. There's a lot of issues, a lot going on here. And I hope we'll have time maybe to discuss it later. Icy Lee, who is a teacher in Hong Kong, wrote an article in 21 where she said, you should only correct one particular aspect of the writing, only the spelling or only the grammar or only the coherence, but the responses she got, again, it was in the same journal, if I remember rightly, the language teaching journal. She got very negative responses from teachers. Teachers didn't like it at all, neither did students. And I must say, neither do I. I don't think that focusing only on spelling, for example, may result in the fact that you totally ignore a very bad mistake in grammar, which the students really needed to be corrected. And it can lead to a neglect of some important feedback, corrective feedback. Higher level students appreciate being corrected more than lower level ones do. I suppose this is obvious, but it's borne out by the research. There is a possible incongruence, a sort of conflict between the teacher beliefs and student beliefs. Teachers, on the whole, believe it's better to correct slightly less. Students believe that everything should be corrected. On the other hand, you do get this, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this as I have, that if a student has everything corrected, they may say they want everything corrected, but if everything's corrected and they've got a lot of mistakes and the whole writing page is covered with corrections and crossings out and codes and whatever, they get very discouraged and demotivated, and they won't bother very often to go through everything. Is just too much. So we have a conflict here. We've got two conflicts. We've got a conflict between what students say they want and what happens if they get it, and a conflict between what teachers think should happen and what students think should happen. Amy says, used to use a color code, found 90 students simply didn't know how to do it. Yes, right. I think my own feeling is that as far as we can, if we're not sure the students, if it's not something obvious that we're sure the students can self-correct, I would tend to provide the correct form if I have time. And here we come up against again against this issue of time. On the whole, it appears that it's better for the students if you do actually provide them with the correct form, unless you're quite sure that they, with a little bit of effort, can access the correct form themselves. Then I did a questionnaire-based survey myself. What I've been saying so far is research around the world, okay? But I did one here locally, which I published in the latest edition of my course in English language teaching. And this was when I was teaching a master's course in Oranim. I asked the teachers, several classes of teachers, in fact, did it over 2 or 3 years. I repeated it about 2 or 3 times. And I asked them to administer a questionnaire to their students of elementary up to high school. And this was the questionnaire. So when I make a mistake in written work, I think it's very good, good, not very good, bad, if the teacher doesn't correct me at all. So the students who thought it's very good if the teacher doesn't correct me at all, put a check in the first column for that, okay? Second question, I think it's good that if she indicates there's a mistake but doesn't tell me what it is. or maybe it's better if it indicates a mistake and gives me a hint what kind of mistake it is. This is when you have this code, okay, like G for grammar and so on. Or indicates as a mistake and writes what the correct form should be. And then the final two questions are about rewriting. Corrects me in any of the ways indicated and doesn't make me rewrite, or corrects me and makes me rewrite. Well, what do you think students answered? What do you think your students would answer? I'll show you in a moment what the students wrote. Yeah, just look at the
Students would
chat
say
box for a second.
correct and not make me rewrite, correct?
Sorry?
I think students will say corrects me and does not make me rewrite.
Okay, that's your guess.
But perhaps I'm jaded.
I'll show you the answers in a moment. Remember, this is 1,000 students from all levels. Okay. Miriam says, Michelle says they are willing to rewrite. They'd like a hint, makes it challenging. Yeah, interesting. Okay, let me show you what they answered. Where the dark blue is no, I don't think the teacher should do this. And the light blue is yes, yes, I think the teacher should. So if you look at and it goes from right to left because this was done on a Hebrew speaking program, and I didn't manage to find out how to turn it round. So from right to left. Okay, let's start with the first question. Doesn't correct me at all. No, that is a bad idea. In other words, it corresponds with the worldwide research which says that students on the whole say yes, they want to be corrected. Now look at the next three questions. Tells me the mistake, doesn't tell me what it is. Tells me mistake, gives me a hint, like SP for spelling. Tells me there's a mistake and writes in the correct form, which is explicit direct correction. And if you notice, the yes is moving up and the no is moving down over those three questions. In other words, the clearer and more explicit the teacher's feedback is, the better the students like it. Now, on the whole, there's always going to be individuals who feel differently, but on the whole, this was the uniform. And remember, I'm talking about 1,000 students over 3 years, replicating this over 3 years. And I think it's probably pretty reliable. Now, what my teachers said when they looked at this was, oh, they're just lazy. They can't be bothered to work it out themselves. They want you to do the work for them. But if you look at the answers to the last two questions, then they're not lazy at all. Corrects me in any of the ways indicate doesn't make me rewrite sort of half and half. But corrects me in any of the ways indicated and makes me rewrite, a substantial majority say yes. I should be made to rewrite. I should rewrite. That's what will help me learn. And it's fairly clear then that they're not lazy, and therefore, if I go back to the previous questions, I think I should actually believe them. I think that they're probably saying something worth listening to when they say it helps us more if the teacher tells us what the mistake was. The teacher may not always have time to tell you. She may just have to underline or give a hint because it doesn't have time, but nevertheless, we should take into account that from the student's point of view, what is most helpful to them is if you give them what it should be, give them the correct form. And yes, they do understand that rewriting is worthwhile, that they will learn better if they rewrite. Okay, any comments on that?
I think it's
The writing.
fascinating. Could I say, sorry, did someone want to talk before me?
Can you write, Amy? Because
Yes.
like people to see what yes. So Michelle was absolutely right. They want their writing corrected and they're willing to rewrite. Yes.
The only problem
Exactly.
is that if I have to check 60G
Well,
essays and
exactly.
correct every single word, it will take me
Exactly.
600
That's
hours or
exactly the
10,000
dilemma.
hours.
So we take into account what students want, but we can't deliver exactly what they want because we don't have time. We're human beings and we have too many classes and students to cope with. Exactly. But I think even if we can't do what they want, I think it's important to know what they want and why. Moshe says quite rightly, the truth of the matter is that students know how to study and what they should do to learn better, even though many times they're not willing to make the effort. Yes. Miriam says, or move to a smaller school. Okay, David, there's your answer. Move to a smaller school. Okay. Conclusions from my own research. The learners feel corrective feedback is valuable. They want to be corrected. They prefer explicit correction. They understand the value of rewriting. They do not, on the whole, like to be corrected by their peers. Now, this last one actually didn't come into the writing question. It came into the speaking question. I had a parallel one on correcting of oral work. And the students were asked in that one, do you like it if the teacher corrects you or if your peers correct you? And a very large majority said, we don't like to be corrected by other students. We want to be corrected only by the teacher. And the teachers who did this, who were on the MA course, said, oh, it's because they feel uncomfortable or embarrassed or distressed by correcting stroke being corrected by other students. And I said, go back and ask them why this was their answer. And they'll tell you. And it turns out that the reason had nothing to do with being distressed or embarrassed. It had everything to do with we rely on the teacher to give us the right answer and we don't rely on each other, which is fair enough. If I want to be corrected, I want to make sure that the correction is a correct correction, and it's much more likely to be accurate if it's coming from the teacher. Finding time, wow. I want you to take your pencil and paper at this point because I'm going to ask you to discuss these points. I'll make each point I ask you to write down on a piece of paper so that you have it ready for you in the discussion. What each point is. So the first point is, and can you write down high priority? The first point is that giving corrective feedback on students' writing is a high priority, and therefore what I'm implying is that we have time out of class for preparation, that correcting our students' written work is probably what we should be spending most of our time on, rather than, for example, preparing a Kahoot, which takes ages, or looking for texts, or looking for pictures, or getting AI to draw pictures for us, or getting AI to compose text for us. These are all important, but probably correcting students' written work is a higher priority. And therefore, what I'm saying is if you have time, then spend a lot of it, as much as you can, on giving feedback on their written work. And the other points I'd like you to discuss are lowering the workload by selective taking in of compositions. In other words, I'll take in I'll get in yours, and yours today, and yours, and yours tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, Amy, thanks for that comment. We'll talk about that, I think, when we get on to the session on writing essays. I'll come back to peer editing and peer correction. Yeah, Gail, absolutely. I'll come on to that later. It's in here somewhere, one of the slides. So lowering the workload by selective. So can you write down selective? Selective taking of compositions. So I'll take in 5 today and 5 tomorrow and 5 or another 10 next week and so on until I get through the class. Giving only a comment. If I don't have time to do all the detailed correction, then a comment, but a comment which does provide specific guidance. In other words, not very good or quite good or something like that, which is useless, but have a look at your spelling and check with the dictionary, or make sure you use the past tense when you're talking about the past, or comments which will help them. If you haven't got time to correct everything, at least comments that will help them with their rewrite or with future writing. And if online, and here we go, well, the point that Gail just brought up, using AWE stands for Automatic Writing Evaluation. And it's tools like Grammarly. I'll come on to that in a moment. Which can save you time. It can't substitute for you, but if you've got your students writing online, then using the AWE tools can save you a lot of time. And the other compromise is I'm only going to correct the really serious errors, and I'm going to ignore the ones which they don't, which are not so bad at the moment, and I'll come back to them maybe later. Okay, the items which I've written in bold here are the ones I wanted you to jot down and which I'd like you to discuss and come back to me on in your breakout groups. So, Gail, could you put people into rooms and we'll have a 5 or 7 minute discussion? And please remember to keep your microphones on, to turn on your cameras and to participate, all of you. And just a minute or two, perhaps at the beginning, to introduce.
No. 1 second. Here we go.
Okay. Anyway,
It was too short.
Yeah, we were having such a lively discussion.
sorry, we interrupted you, did we? Sorry about that.
That's okay.
The problem with the breakout rooms.
Yeah. But there you go. Okay, we'll have maybe 5 or 6 people, Gail, to contribute. And maybe I'll ask Gail, while you were talking, Gail said something which I wanted her to share with everyone. So I'll start off with Gail's contribution, and then I'll ask Michelle, and then 5 or 6 of the participants. So Gail first.
What I said to Penny is that what I find the most useful is to allot time for the writing in class. I know that it means giving up control, getting off the stage, not teaching as such, but on the other hand, it means that you can give your pupils attention, help them, make sure that they're not producing things at home with AI. And the most important thing is that while they are working and once they get used to it, you can start helping students who find it more difficult, and you can also give the kind of feedback that they are really looking for during class time and not piling up the work for you to be overwhelmed at the end of the day, even if you try to scaffold your writing tasks that you want to look at and give feedback on. So the main
Thanks,
message
Mel.
is
get
off the stage, walk around, help the kids write the words that they need, etc., etc.
Michelle, you're nodding violently. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, definitely
Apart from the fact that you agree.
the kids often say, how do you spell this? How to spell that? I run to the board, I write it on the board, and they
Rushing
use it.
around, yeah. Oh,
I had a specific system where the dictation sentences I always corrected, but I didn't take off points. I only took off points if they misspelled the dictation word, but I didn't take off points for misspelling other words, nor for poor grammar. As long as I could understand what they wrote, I corrected it, and they had to correct.
yeah.
And at the end of each marking period, they had to hand in their corrected dictations, and then they got a 100 in the average if they had corrected. Eventually, I started giving, if kids who didn't correct got a 0 in their average. And so everyone corrected, and also in writing tasks from the book and answering questions, I always demanded full sentences. They handed everything in. I just went V. I told them that something big, stood out. I corrected, but I kept track of who worked and who didn't, and that was that.
Yofi, Dove. So who's raised their hand? Gail, do you want to
Lisa
Can
has
I,
raised.
can I share?
Lisa?
Okay.
Hi. Also, Michelle, just to answer something to you about, my students ask me all the time. How do
You need
spell-
to speak louder, Lisa. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. So my students ask me, how do I spell a specific word? So I always send it back to them. I said, how would you spell that word? And it stops them in their tracks, and they think about it, and then they basically, majority of the time, come up with the correct spelling. So I'm getting them to think as well. I had a wonderful chat with Ilanit, and we discussed how important, we're basically teaching to test. We're teaching towards the Bagrut, and we have to correct every aspect of their work. And I'm not going to select specific students' work, and I have to check all my students' work. And this is something I've got to let go of. And I loved the idea of underlining a sentence and saying, right, just remind me about the grammar of he, she, and it with present simple. Right, that applies to the sentence. Go and try and correct it yourself. And also something that was very important to us was not to mark in red pen. The color that we are marking in will also affect the feeling of the feedback we're giving back to our students. So those were two big things that we came up with.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Okay.
Hanan.
Yes, I would like to share with a very small idea. Whenever I correct essays for my students, I usually tend to write common sentences that appear, or mistakes that appear in several essays, like if they misuse certain tense. So I write several sentences from all the essays after I give them the essays back. And I screen them on the board and try with the whole class to figure out what is wrong with that sentence. And then I can go over some grammatical, aspects or mistakes. And I found it really useful because usually foreign students have almost, same mistakes, like, because of the language. So, yeah. And it saves time instead of, going one by one. So this is like a class activity.
We also used to do that, Hanan, and I love it. But don't do it or have any of the new teachers in your school do it for the inspectors, because for some reason, a lot of the inspectors don't like it. And they say that we shouldn't be showing errors on the board. So they feel that in a demo lesson, it is not an acceptable activity. That's just a little tip. It's something that I taught one of the new teachers in my school, and She wasn't accepted to test Bagrit exams because she didn't get a recommendation from the inspector. So be careful, even though it's an excellent activity. Gillian, and then Adina, and that will be it for this evening.
Okay, I'll be quick. I am privileged to work in a smallish school, small classes, so I have time to give detailed corrective feedback, which I do in writing, and then sit with each pupil one-on-one to discuss their mistakes. And what happened recently was a couple of the pupils requested taking the corrected version of that previous task into the next task as a reference. And they referred to the mistakes they had made in the first task and prevented them from making the same mistakes in the second task. And it became a learning process in itself. And this was very rewarding, I found, and it was proof to go the whole way and to help them to the end.
Nice. Adina?
Julia, I love that idea. That's exactly what we came up with together. We had that idea to use that as sort of like a scaffold for the next writing activity and have the students then be able to refer to it and not make mistakes and be able to self-correct and incorporate their what they learned. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my pupils requested it on their own bat, and they took these pages in, and they were checking themselves along the way, and it was
Really
was
nice.
great.
Okay, Penny.
Okay, back to me. So I'll thank you very much for that. I didn't manage to take notes this time, I'm afraid, but I think there were some really nice things which came up, and as you said, the discussion within the groups also, you probably said lots of interesting things to each other. Just having a look at the chat box, red pens, not red pens. Okay. Yeah, ask me about spelling. Moshe says, I find it important to teach students use a dictionary, so I always refer them to one when they ask me about spelling. We'll talk about this later. I actually don't entirely agree with you because I think because the problem with a dictionary is it takes a lot of time, and I'm very short of lesson time. So I would rather tell them what the word means in class, but then do other activities, get them to use the dictionary either at home or when they're reading for themselves. Yeah, colours. Yes. Never ask students to copy mistakes. Yes, this is the point that Gail brought up about should you or should you not write up mistakes on the board, and it's very controversial. And as Gail said, the inspectors don't like it when the inspectors come. Teachers are sort of mixed views about this. Personally, I prefer not to, but other teachers have had good experiences, so we'll leave that as an open possibility. Checklists, yeah, nice. We'll talk about checklists in a moment in general. Okay, let me share again. Now, I hope I'm sharing the right screen. Can you see it?
Not yet. Yes, automated
Yes.
writing evaluation tools.
Okay, and you can see there, hold on, let me just make it into full screen. Grammarly, I think everybody knows about. And the other one, Ginger Software, is a new one which I came across when I was, again, when I was preparing this session. And it's really, really nice. Have a look at it. Don't need to sign up, and it's free, and it looks very easy to use. And the question is how to use these tools, how useful they are. Gail was recommending, and certainly they have their uses. Question is whether we're going to ask the students to use them, to type in their stuff and get Grammarly to correct it for them, or whether I'm going to use it as a teacher to correct my students. By students on the whole, yes, the research shows that it helps. Incidentally, the reference here, Nikki Hockley, is also a personal friend of mine, and she's great. All things to do with digital tools in language teaching. Anything written by Nikki Hockley is worth reading. So go ahead with, if you see her name on an article, it's probably worth paying attention to. So yes, used by students. By teachers, yes, good for formative assessment, as we will come on to formative and summative in a moment. Helping students improve. Not so good for giving grades for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's not 100% reliable. I have come across instances where Grammarly has corrected mistakes of mine that didn't exist and ignored mistakes that I did make when I was testing it out. So you have to be a bit careful about it. Having said that, it does pick up most of the mistakes and correct them reliably, but not 100%. And then the problem, of course, of cheating and students submitting text, which has already been corrected by AI when they're submitting it as if it were their own original text, and we'll talk about that in a later session. General consensus that automated writing evaluation tools can help, but they cannot replace the teacher. I think this is true of all the digital and AI tools, that they help, but they cannot replace. And so the best is teacher feedback supported by the digital tools. And onto assessment. Okay. Giving a grade. And someone brought up earlier in the chat box the point about hold on, I've lost my chat. Where's my chat? There's my chat. Okay. Difference with the crucial difference between formative and summative, and she was quite right. Formative is the assessment you give ongoing assignments in order to help students do them better. It's normally a fairly rough evaluation. You don't say 93% or something like that. Not good enough, okay, very good. Plus the feedback, which we were talking about earlier in this presentation. It's normally fairly rough, but it just gives them an idea of more or less where they are. And students want to know, how good am I? How good is my writing relative to what it should be in this class? And often in the form of symbols, as I said here. Summative assessment is a more precise assessment at the beginning or end of a course or term or year in general. Usually for us, it's the grade we give at the end of the year. But if at the beginning, then we might do a test with a summative assessment result in order to put students stay into Hakbatzot or into different levels. If it's outside school, in a language school or something, they use an entry exam which has a summative assessment result, which they then use to allocate the students. If it's at the end for the final school report or for Bagrut, and it's formulated normally according to whatever the school norm is. Can you just write in the chat box how the school evaluations work? Do they give in your school? Do they give percentages, or do they give letters or numbers, or what? Yeah, numbers. What sort of numbers? Single numbers or percentage numbers? Numbers up to 100, yeah. 5, that means 1 to 5, Lisa. Yeah, that's it. Overwhelmingly percentages and a written comment. Okay. Yeah, thank you. 40 to 100 grades in numbers plus. Yes, a specific skill, Judy says 1 to 5. So you're giving a profile as well as a single number. Yeah. Siwa has a sticker. Nice. Okay. It's important for transparency that both the students need to know the criteria by which the grade will be fixed. So we come on to checklists and rubrics. Sarah says, sounds a bit resentful about this. We're forced to give comments, which is very time consuming, but probably helpful to the students. Yes, in a perfect world, formative assessment used to help teachers adjust their teaching, yes, as well as students adjust their learning. Okay, so checklists and rubrics to make our assessment reliable and accurate. Checklists are for students, rubrics are for teachers, basically. So checklists are the list provided by students which tell them how their compositions will be assessed. If we're talking about the assessment of a particular piece of writing, an essay, for example, this. I'm talking about junior high. And the students can use it to check through and write little ticks in the margin if they've done whatever it says here.
And the thing, Penny, that I do with something like this is ask the students to focus on one or two things from the list in their next writing of what they would like to improve, because they can't possibly do it all at once.
No. Okay. Students don't have patience for the checklist. Yeah, Batsheva, very true. And what Gail just suggested is one way of making them palatable and possible. So you might cut this down when you're doing. I'm going to suggest in a moment. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah says, good to give good, hardworking students. Others prefer not to, or give a very abbreviated, simpler version. Yeah. Miriam, I haven't come on to rubrics yet. I'm still on checklists. Don't look at checklists. Don't look at checklists only at the final grade. Yes, that's when, after you've given it back to them, look at the final grade. Checklists are for, not for the final, for looking at the final grade. They are while the student is writing. So they know how they're going to be evaluated, and they use the checklist to help them make sure that they've checked everything. But it is a bit long and heavy, you're right. I have to admit at this point that I've never myself used checklists. When I was teaching, they hadn't really become as popular as they are today. I didn't use checklists, and I didn't use rubrics either. And I'm going to ask you for your help with talking about them in a moment, discussing them. Administering checklists. So what I would suggest, as I say, I don't have personal experience to back me up here, so you'll have to help me. But what I would suggest is displaying it on the board first, going through it to make sure that students understand it, and then invite changes, deletions, additions from students. In other words, you might want to rewrite it in light of students' comments. You might want to delete some of them. You might want to mark the ones that you want them particularly to pay attention to. You might want them to submit a checked off checklist with every essay, but for that it would probably need to be a bit shorter. In any case, it is a good idea in general to go through the checklist with the students in advance, to spend some lesson time going through it, perhaps deleting bits out of it and altering bits out of it according to what they say, how they respond, and then letting them use them. Rubrics are what teachers use to assess criteria which determine the grade of a submitted piece of writing. Basically, it's important that they should correspond with the learner's checklist. We need to play fair. I'm judging your piece of writing by criteria which you already know about because they're on your checklist. so you know how you're going to be judged. And if there are any criteria on your rubrics which are not included in the checklist, make sure students know about them. And at this point, show you an example. This is for the teacher. And exactly what numbers, what percentages you allot to level each row and each column is up to you.
Excuse me, Penny, but just one thing. Isn't the language use and the accuracy and clarity very similar? Strikes me a little. So why to have two different ones? I'm just...
Yeah. And I noticed this when I was copying down. This is one which is taken from, which I didn't compose, which was taken from the writing guidebook, which we're composing at the moment to put on the Inspectorate website. And there is an overlap, which I think we need to edit here between these two.
Also, the first two, no offense, but task and content and organization. May I say that the old way, to me at least, was good, was a content, then afterwards vocabulary, language, and spelling. Why can't we just do that?
I'll talk about this later. I don't want to go into it now. We haven't got time, but you've got a very valid point there.
That's all I'm saying. I see the overlap.
I think this, I just, as I say, I took it from the material which is ready made. And I noticed as I was doing it, the point which you brought up, but I didn't have time to edit it. Certainly there is an overlap here and you would need to edit it yourselves before using it. But the point, my main point here is that there should be a rubric which helps you decide that you are fairly allotting the grade according to a criteria which the students, you've shared with the students, they know how they're being judged. So, okay. So take this as a sample of the kind of thing, but the actual text, as you say, leaves much to be desired, and you can obviously, most of you do, I expect, create your own rubrics according to your own professional judgment. Okay, I now want us to share, because I say I'm a novice on this, I don't know very much about checklists and rubrics, and can you go into a Padlet which Gail is about to share with you, and write your own experiences. Those of you who've used checklists, write your own experience on, sorry, I said it was slide 47, but it's slide 46, Gail, this one. Can you please go into the Padlet, which Gail will you show them the link on the chat box, or how do you want to do it?
And in the chat on the Zoom, it's there.
Okay.
It's there, and we already have about 15 people in the Padlet.
Great. Okay. An interesting comment there.
Supposed to necessarily be for students.
Yes.
It's certainly
actually I use it in my exams. I put, when I do an writing exam, I write to my students how I put a mark, and they actually don't look at it. They just said, why I get 10 out of 30, why I get 15 out of 30. And I tell them, no, look at the rubric. You got in vocabulary here 5, you got in the language 8. So most of my students don't look, although it's make it clear.
Yeah.
I teach my students the rubric in advance. I put it up on the board. We go over in very much detail so they understand what is required
it's
of them.
really, really important for students to be aware of how they're going to be judged, how they're going to be assessed. Great, thank you very much. Anyway, this will be up on the Moodle, so you can read through at your leisure later. But thank you very much personally. I'm very grateful for your sharing of this, because I say this is a point on which I am far from being an expert. Okay, let's go back to sharing my my screen again. And we're getting near the end of this presentation now. I'm not sure
The attendance form.
whether... Can you see the screen?
I'll put it up at 8:30.
Can you see my screen?
It says 8:33.
Yes.
Sorry.
I have to say a few words about portfolio. So I'm going to go a little bit over 8:30 this time. It'll take another 10 minutes or so, so I crave your patience. Writing portfolio is a collection of a single student's writing during the year term. So like a portfolio from an artist of all the drawings they've done. A writing portfolio is a collection of all what the student has done, maybe kept in a ring file or a box file. Probably a ring file with punching holes and just keeping things in order is better. The student is responsible for inserting everything that they write, each entry in his or her portfolio, and the portfolio is in principle not taken home. Normally it's kept in the classroom where English lessons take place, or the teacher may keep it in whatever storage place they have available. Portfolio entries could be anything really. Quick, just write text. Remember I talked last time or the time before on just write text, very quick 5-minute writing. There could be preliminary drafts of essays as well as final drafts. And when we talk about essays, we'll talk about writing and rewriting. Dictations, poems they've written, brainstorms. We've discussed all of these in previous sessions. Notes, printed out text. If they've done something online, then printed out and put onto paper and inserted into the portfolio. Incidentally, there is such thing, of course, as a digital portfolio, which is used in some classes in different parts of the world, but I prefer paper ones. As far as I know, they're easier to cope with in our schools. And it's important that each entry should be dated, so students know what order they were written. And if there is a classroom notebook, then that also can be inserted within the portfolio. 2 ways the portfolio is used, one by the student, one by the teacher. By the student, it's important to, every now and again, allot lesson time for portfolio work, 5-10 minutes. And 3 things I would ask the students to do. Firstly, gloat. Be aware of how much they've written. Be pleased with themselves and how much they've progressed from beginning to the point at which they're opening up the portfolio. Check for any feedback the teacher may have inserted since they last look. And edit. They can, during this time, change or add to any entries they want to, or even decorate them in some classes in order to improve or in the light of teacher feedback. The teacher can use the portfolio for ongoing when you have time, and this is one of the ways you can use flexi time, as it were. Those of you who are very overloaded with work, when you have time, leafing through the portfolios and adding feedback to recent entries, even if it's only a sticker or a tick or whatever, or a written word or 2. So that's the ongoing thing. The nice thing about the portfolio is that it's sort of flexi time. You take out the portfolios when you have time. It doesn't have to be after a particular lesson. And at the end of the year, the portfolio can be used as a basis for a writing grade rather than a single test or essay, which is a useful function. Okay, I'm not going to really have time to... Can't see the chat now. I've lost my chat again. I keep losing this chat. There it is. Okay. Okay. Can't the writing notebook also be a portfolio? Yes, it can, but that means that anything they do on a piece of paper outside the notebook, how do you put it in? The advantage of a file is that it allows for printing out stuff, and it allows for writing on separate pieces of paper and a variety of media. Okay, end of session. Two things, assignment and activity. Assignment is this. Read it for yourselves. Brief report of just trying out the questions on your own students and see what sort of answers you get and whether they accord with the ones which Amy, thank you for that comment. Yes, I forgot about this. The students can, that's one further use of the portfolio which I missed. They can choose pieces of their writing they wish to edit, present at semester if they want to present their own, a selected item of their own. Thank you, Amy, for that. Forgot that. Okay, and finally the activity, self-assessment, which I haven't dealt with at all, so I'm going to ask you to do it perhaps as a classroom activity towards the end of the year, though actually you can do this at any time in the year. Display and go through the questionnaire. It's going to be on the next slide. You might want to edit it though to suit yourselves. Tell them they should answer in their own words in English, so it's another English activity, English writing activity, but it also works as self-assessment and distribute it to students either as a worksheet on paper or online if you're using the school website or whatever. And the questionnaire looks like this, but of course you're welcome to edit. This is my own version, which I've used with classes. You can, of course, edit and use however you want to do it. And I've on purpose not given multiple choice or anything because I want them to write, okay? So I want them, how would you evaluate your level of English? I'm not going to write medium, good, excellent. I want them to say how they feel their level. They might want to write not good enough, or they might want to feel I feel it's pretty good, or whatever, however they want to express themselves. Michelle, okay, next time I'll ask you at the beginning of the session, please, to talk about the 3 types of portfolio that you've just listed in the chat box, which I didn't know about. So I want you to teach me, but not now. What time we're too
no
late.
problem.
But I'll ask you to present at the beginning of the next time.
Sorry, Penny, how would you like this presented?
How would I like this presented?
The answers to the questions.
I want your students to write the answers to your questions. And
how do I present it to you?
You don't present it to me. It's an activity, not an assignment. You don't have to do it at all if you don't want to. It's just every session I provide an activity which you may or may not want to do in your classes, okay? So that's what this is, Tamal. It's just to try out in your classes if you feel like it, you feel it appropriate, and you would like to do it, okay?
It's excellent, thank you.
Okay, references and further reading. I said I promised you bibliography in this case. It's quite a lot of research referred to. And thank you, and see you next week, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Wishing everyone a peaceful night.
Bye.
Special shout out to all my northern colleagues who
I'm
are
sorry,
Zoom
but
teaching.
where is the end of the session? Sorry, I saw it now.